Great to see all of you this morning. I've been in a series on Sunday nights on the topic of prayer, and because of my gospel meeting schedule and travel, it got a little disjointed in some ways. I would be here and do a lesson, then I'd be gone, and I'd come back and do a lesson and a half, and then be gone. And anyway, it just didn't flow quite like I'd hoped. But I wanted to conclude it today, and I wanted to give time for actual prayer tonight, Lord willing, when we come back. And so the only way I could do that then was to preach the final lesson now. So I want to do that this morning and share with you the final lesson on the series of prayer that we've been in. But rather than wait till tonight and then push another week out, we'll just go ahead and share this lesson with you this morning. Then we'll kind of have our prayer service this evening. I'll talk at the close of our service this morning a little bit how that's going to go this evening before we leave. But for now, let me just share with you just a few things that I think still important in this conversation of prayer that we've been having over the past several weeks. And really, I think this is kind of the question that we've yet to really address. And that is, how does God respond to our prayers? How is it that He reacts? And now, by the way, you've heard me, I'm not going to share anything new with you. You've probably heard me say these things that I'm about to say. You've probably heard me say them before. But because we're in the topic matter, we need to come back and talk about these things a little bit this morning. So let's first know how He responds, and let's take the simplest of all of them first. Sometimes we ask God something and He just says yes, and just gives it. It just provides it. If you go into the book of Exodus for a minute, that James 5 text will come up later in our study here in just a little while. But in Exodus chapter 33, it may seem like an interesting text to go to, but I'm just trying to illustrate to you this idea that sometimes God just responds in the affirmative. Here, we've made a request before Him, we've asked Him of something, and He just says yes, and affirms what it is that we have asked of Him. So the Lord, verse 17 of chapter 37 of the book of Exodus. So the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. So Moses asked, and what did God do? So I'm going to give it to you. I'll provide it for you. And he said, please show me your glory. And then he said, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you, and I will be gracious, to whom I will be gracious, and will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. And the Lord said, here is a place by me, and you shall stand on the rock. So it shall be a while my glory passes by, that I will put you in the cleft of the rock, and will cover you with my hand while I pass by. And then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. Now, I realized as soon as I put that text in this sermon, all I was going to do was raise 100 other questions on 100 different other topics. But I want you to focus. The simplicity I'm trying to get you to understand is this. Moses asked and Moses received. He wanted to see the glory of God. Were there limitations? Yes. Did God put a cover over him in a sense? Yes. Did he have to hide him from the full view of God? Yes. All of that's true. But Moses asked and he received. God said yes to what it was he was asking of him. In very simplistic ways, that's kind of sometimes how it works. We make a request of the Lord and He provides for that. I mean, sometimes it's simple things, sometimes it's greater things, and yet God simply responds to those things. And sometimes we pray things and don't even realize maybe God did actually say yes to that prayer. You know, we pray for simple things like safety in travel, and we received it, and get home from that trip and never once acknowledge the fact that God answered our prayer. So think about that sometimes when we ask simple things even, just God's help and aid in general life issues. When we get it, maybe we need to pause and be thankful for that which God has affirmatively said yes to. That's the simplest of them in so many ways. But there is a secondary way I think we need to appreciate that God answers prayer. Sometimes it's just yes, and other times it's even more than we asked. I think those are times where we need to pause and give thanks and give glory and praise to the name of God. And go back in the account of Solomon in 1 Kings chapter 3. In 1 Kings chapter 3 and in verse 1. So now Solomon made a treaty with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and married Pharaoh's daughter. And then he brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall all around Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the people sacrificed at the high places because there was no house built for the name of the Lord until those days. And Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of his father David, except that he sacrificed and burned incense at the high places. Always kind of pause, by the way. It's always interesting, right? You've got David, the man after God's own heart. His son steps in, right? He's just the next in line, and he's already creating problems. His decision-making is already going to lead to the difficulties and the division that the kingdom's going to see just 3 kings in. And so which God warned them about when they asked for a king to begin with. But just a side part as it relates to that. But now the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. And Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. And at Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "Ask, what shall I give you?" What a blessing. The God of all creation, the God of all power, the one who had ability to grant anything. This isn't Solomon asking God, "Give me whatever I ask for." No, this is God coming to Solomon and saying, "Ask it and I'll give it to you." Powerful. It's a powerful scene. And Solomon said, "You have shown great mercy to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in truth and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with you. You have continued this great kindness for him, and you have given him a son to sit on his throne as it is this day. Now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of my father David, but I am a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in, and your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too numerous to be numbered or counted. Therefore give to your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil, for who is able to judge this great people of yours?" Wouldn't you wish every person who ever accepted an office, every person who's ever been elected into public service would pray before the God, "Give me wisdom. Give me wisdom to discern between what is right and what is wrong. Give me the ability to make the right observations about the situations that I'm going to come in front of." I love the wisdom of Solomon here. You have granted your people under my leadership, and I am but a child. I don't know whether to come in or out of the rain, right? That's the imagery he gives. I need your help. I need your wisdom. God said, "I'll give you anything," right? He comes to him in a dream. "I'll give you whatever it is you ask." And Solomon says, "Give me wisdom. Give me an understanding heart." And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing in verse 10. And now verse 11, "Then God said to him, because you've asked this thing and have not asked for life for yourself." Would that have hit your list, by the way? Have whatever you want. Give me long life. Maybe that would have hit your list. I don't know. You haven't asked for riches. Maybe that would have hit your list of things you would have asked for. When God gives you a blank check and says, "Ask me whatever you want, I'll give it to you." Maybe riches would have hit your list. Nor have you asked that the life of your enemies. Strike all those guys down, Lord. Could ask for that. But you've asked for yourself understanding to discern justice. Because God saw the wisdom in Solomon by asking for more wisdom and understanding. And he didn't ask for money or wealth or prosperity. He didn't ask for God to extend his life beyond what was natural. He didn't ask God to strike down dead everybody who's ever questioned him or challenged him in some way. He just asks for discernment. Help me understand the things that I need to know to lead your people in the right way. Because you've done accordingly. Behold, I have done according to your words, verse 12. See, I have given you a wise and understanding heart, so that there has not been anyone like you before you, nor shall any like you arise after you. And I have also given you what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be anyone like you among the kings all your days. And you can keep reading the context there through verse 15. God says, "I'll give you exactly what you asked for and more. I'll grant unto you exactly your request that you made unto me. You asked for wisdom, you've got it. You asked for an understanding heart, you've got it. I'll grant that to you, but I'm not done, because I appreciate the righteousness of your request. I appreciate the mindset that you had and the reasoning behind your request before me. And so because of that, I'll grant unto you all the things that other people would have asked for. I'll grant unto you the riches. I'll grant unto you the honor. There won't be anybody like you before or after, Solomon. You will reach a pinnacle that no one else could even think about reaching among men." Sometimes when we put our request before God the Father, He says yes, like He did with Moses. Sometimes we ask God of things and He says sure. He provides for that. He gives those things to us. And then He also says, but you know what, you could also benefit from this. And He grants us even more than what we started with. If only God answered every prayer with one of those two ways, we'd be perfectly fine, wouldn't we? If every request and every prayer that was ever put before the throne of God was always answered in one of those two ways, none of us would have any issues whatsoever. We would be as content and happy as we could be. But the Bible doesn't stop there, does it? There are two other ways that we need to appreciate that God responds to prayer. The first is that sometimes God says, wait. Now, He doesn't necessarily verbalize that, by the way. It just happens that way. That we have to wait. We pray about it. It's not been resolved yet. We may go back and pray some more. Still not resolved maybe. We may have to go back and pray some more. God may be telling us to wait. What's interesting in verse 11 of Ecclesiastes 3 is simply this. He has made everything beautiful in His time. Also, He has put in eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Can I encourage you to appreciate this thought from this writer here in Ecclesiastes this morning? If I try to figure out why God answered a prayer in the manner that He did, I'll struggle. Did you see the last phrase of that verse? On one side he says, remember, God does things in His own time, right? Sometimes it's wait. Sometimes you've got to be patient. Sometimes you're not going to get what you want in the immediate. Sometimes you're going to just have to let God work in His own time. But I want you to notice the end of that phrase as well. No one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. Nobody in this room this morning, none of us, have the ability to understand every nuance and thought and detail as to why God did what He did, or why God didn't do what we thought He should. That's hard, right? Because we'd like to know. Let's just be honest about that. We'd like to know. Why didn't God answer my prayer affirmatively? Why didn't He say yes and then some? Why didn't He respond? Why is He making me be patient for these things? And I've seen many Christians struggle with their faith. I've seen them struggle with their convictions. I've seen them struggle, stay faithful to God. And the reason was they were trying to figure out the mind of God, which cannot be understood by men. They're trying to understand what cannot be understood. We understand what God reveals, right? We understand what God tells us. We're learning about that in our Bible study time. We know what God reveals unto us, but no man can understand from beginning to end everything that God sees, understands, knows, and does. We can't. And so I've got one of two choices. I can let that discouragement, when God's telling me to be patient, let Him make all things beautiful in His time. When God's telling me don't try to understand what isn't for you to understand, and to not let that affect our faith and our convictions and our trust and confidence in God, and certainly not let those moments stop us from praying. Because I don't know, right? I don't know when or if God will make this situation be better or stronger or more beneficial to me. And so I'll just keep communicating and praying and being patient through that process. In John chapter 7, Jesus walked in Galilee, the first verse teaches us. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee, for He did not want to walk in Judea, because the Jews sought to kill Him. Now the Jews' feast of tabernacles was at hand, and His brothers therefore said to Him, depart from here and go into Judea, that your disciples also may see the works that you are doing. Makes sense to them, right? Why are you doing all these miracles up here in Galilee? There's nobody here. That's their point. There's nobody here. The great multitude of Jews that need to see that you're the Messiah, they're down there in Jerusalem. And the Feast of Tabernacles is coming up. Let's go down there to Jerusalem. Let's do a few of these miracles in front of that audience and watch them come running to you as the Messiah. That's their point, right? No one does anything in secret while he himself seeks to be known openly. If you're really trying to introduce yourself to this audience, go do these things in Jerusalem. But now their mindset wasn't very pure. It's almost like they were trying to trap him in some ways if you read verse 5. For even his brothers did not believe in him. That's interesting, right? Go down and prove yourself. That's not... People up here aren't getting it. Go down there in Jerusalem where people will really get it or not get it. Go down there. But here's the point. Then Jesus says to them, verse 6, my time has not yet come, but your time is always ready. The world cannot hate you, but it hates me because I testify of it that its works are evil. And the narrative continues there, and the point simply that Jesus makes is it's not time for me to go down there yet. Ultimately, He will. But there are more things that need to be fulfilled. Friends, we don't always know the timing of God. Jesus knew it. Jesus understood the purposes God had in store for Him, but we don't. We don't always know the timing and how God's working and why He's ordering things in the way that He does. And so don't become discouraged in prayer. Don't become discouraged in your faith. Don't convince yourself that God doesn't exist at all or doesn't listen at all because He's asking me to wait. And He's asking me to be patient. Because the Ecclesiastes writer said, you don't understand the beginnings and ends of God. In His time, He works out what needs to come to fruition. And even Jesus understood that certain timing of events needed to happen in certain ways, in ways that men may not know. God sometimes says yes, sometimes He says yes, and then some. Sometimes He says wait. But you know what the hardest one is, don't you? That's the hardest one. Sometimes God just says no. Now again, He may not verbalize that, obviously, but we asked for something and it didn't happen. And it was an obvious no. That's not easy. Because we try to build our convictions that God listens to us. He cares about us. He wants what's best for us. He's seeking what's beautiful in our lives, right? We talk about all those kinds of things and we try to encourage our minds to stay focused on the good that God is. And then all of a sudden something comes up in my life. I pray for the benefit of God and it doesn't happen. Verse 32 of Mark chapter 14. Then they came to a place which was named Gethsemane, and He said to His disciples, sit here while I pray. He took Peter, James, and John with Him. This is Jesus, by the way. And He began to be troubled and deeply distressed. Then He said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch. He went a little farther and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from Him, or let this cup pass from me. Other texts share with us. He said, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. Then He came and found them sleeping and said to Peter, Simon, are you sleeping? Could you not watch 1 hour? Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Again He went away and prayed and spoke the same words. And when He returned, He found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and they did not know what to answer Him. Then He came the third time and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? It is enough. The hour has come. Behold, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. See, my betrayer is at hand. I want us to focus on just a couple of things in this text. Number one, recognize the request that Jesus made. The request was, Father, let this cup pass from me. How can I avoid the consequences and challenges and hurt and harm that was going to come by the things leading up to and His ultimate death on the cross? Is there any way that we can let this be bypassed? Second thing I want you to notice, and you see it clearly here in Mark's record, when he says, Abba, Father, verse 36, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. When Jesus prays this prayer, He prays it with the knowledge and understanding that God had power to do anything He chooses to do. All things are possible for you. And yet we all know the ultimate answer to that prayer, don't we? The prayer was, let this cup pass from me, and we all know that He still ended up being cruelly treated. Mocked, scoffed, struck, spit upon, treated in some of the most inhumane ways that you could ever imagine. A crown of thorns thrusted upon His head. Has to carry the weapon of His demise to Calvary. Ever think about that? The imagery that not only are they going to put you to death, but guess what? You're going to have to carry that weapon all the way. And then they nail Him to that cross. And He dies there. Jesus, the Son of God, prayed fervently with sweat like drops of blood pouring off of Him, that this cup pass from Him, to a God that He had every confidence and conviction in, that had power to do anything. And the answer was no. Now we learn from other narratives that He was comforted, that God provided some aid to Him through this process. But to the request of let this cup pass from me, the answer was no. Now maybe this isn't enough for you. I don't know. I hope it is. I try to let it be enough for me. That even Jesus, who, it's interesting, right? Jesus knew the plan and purposes of God before He arrived. Jesus would have understood that before the foundations of the world, God devised a plan to save man from his sins, and He was part of it. And the part of that plan that He would fulfill is He would have to come and walk among men, to live and die as a man. And He still prays before the throne of God, knowing what has to happen. And when I think He says that phrase, not my will but thine be done, He knows exactly what the will of the Father is. Because that plan had been designed and purposed before the foundations of the world. And He still prayed, even knowing that it was quite possible that the answer could be no. But it didn't stop Him from going once, twice, 3 times to pray before the Father. If God the Son, if the Son of Man, if Jesus had to experience a prayer that received no as an answer, then I think I just have to accept the fact that because I don't know all of God's purposes, and I can't understand Him from beginning to end, and I don't know how His timing works, and I don't appreciate every aspect that maybe even I would like to understand, that I will not let that convince me in any way that God doesn't care about me. He does care. And maybe what God provides in those moments where I'm asking for this and that can't happen for whatever reason. It couldn't happen for Jesus, but here comes the aid and the help and the comforts and the assistance to be able to deal with this that can't be just wiped away. Sometimes God simply says, sometimes He simply says no. And it's disappointing, and it sometimes is faith shaking. as that can be, I hope at the end of the day I'll remind myself that even the Son of the living God experienced that. But never let it shake Him from the paths and purposes that God had. And I think those are the 4 basic ways that God responds to all of our requests before Him. Yes, yes, and then some. Be patient. No. And we'll all experience in our lives, if we pray enough, where we'll experience all of those at some point in time. But ultimately remind yourself of this basic fact, that every response God has, it comes from His love for us as His children. That God responds as a father would. It's interesting, right? Those phrases, Romans 8:15 and Galatians 4:6, and the one we just read out of Mark, where the phrase Abba, Father is used. And Jesus brings us into the adoptive relationship with His Father and allows for us to have the same child-to-father relationship. I raised three pretty smart kids. But ain't a one of them smart as me yet. Not a one of them. Because they haven't had the life experiences I've had. And they haven't seen what I've seen. And they haven't dealt with what I've dealt with. What's your point, Brian? My point is, you and I have not seen what the Father has seen. We don't know, right? The God, the Father of all things, has a vantage point, a viewpoint that none of us have. He sees us. He sees the world. He sees history. He sees the chronology of man. He sees it all from a vantage point that none of us have. And what I do is I trust that He will always respond as that Father. And sometimes He knows what's best for me. Sometimes the greatest thing God has ever done for me is said no. I just have to have the humility to embrace that fact. And too often, sometimes we forget that that's the motivating aspect of what God is doing. Matthew chapter 7 and in verse 9. Matthew chapter 7 and in verse 9. He said, Or what man is there among you who, if his son asks for bread, will he give him a rock, a stone? If he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask Him? Friends, we have a Father who knows our needs. He knows what challenges us. He knows what's best for us. His vantage point is far different than ours. We just need to pray and communicate and trust that every response He gives, no matter which of those 4 things it might fall in, God sees it better than we. And I think in some areas of our prayer life, and I'll make this point, quickly running out of time this morning, but we need to appreciate that sometimes what we're praying for may not be the problem of God being able to answer it. It may be the problem of the human being we're praying for resisting what God's trying to lead them to. You know, we say, well, why hasn't God led this heart back to the Lord? Why hasn't He guided this person to understand? Well, He may be trying and working and presenting and helping and trying and the issue isn't the issue is the answer to that prayer hasn't occurred in the way that I would like, maybe because the person I'm praying for is resistant to what God's trying to encourage them in. We may talk a little bit more about that tonight. But He always loves as a Father. He responds to us as a father to His children. And He wants to bless us. James 1 verse 17 says, every good and perfect gift comes from God. Remember that. When you're debating whether you should pray about something, when you're debating whether you should communicate to the Father, just remember, He wants to help. Not always in the fashion we would like, but He wants to help. He wants to provide. He is a Father that cares about us and provides every good and perfect gift. So Hebrews 4 teaches us to come boldly before the throne of God. Come boldly before Him. Know the kind of Father that He is. Know that He can respond. Know that He can provide answer to all of us. I'm going to have to save some for tonight. We'll see how that goes. But for this morning, how can we encourage you to respond to God the Father? To know the beauty of what He's providing, to know the hope and salvation He's encouraging us in. Maybe you've been praying, Lord, open my heart to your will. Open my thought processes to what you want from me. And follow that. Allow Him to guide us. But if there's something today that we could encourage you in stepping into the promises of God, restoring your relationship with God the Father, how can we pray for you today or assist you in some way? And if there's something we could do to aid you spiritually this morning, we would invite you to come while we stand.